This is the Loudest Crow. I am Jonathan Louderback.
I'm Justin Kroh, and we're here to caw through the noise. Really quick, sorry for missing you all last week. We had stuff going on.
Oh, it's life, man.
It is life, man.
Busy as hell.
Yeah, but
A weird little cold spell coming in through town today.
yeah. I kind of like it though. It's not the kind of cold spell where it's like you're freezing your buns off.
Get your coats out, but you know it's bearable.
It's bearable.
You know, and it's the last bit of cold. Enjoy it because it's about to go away.
Yeah, for sure. You
Right.
know, we're getting into late April already, and then once May hits, it's probably
Well, you know, it is better than last year if you remember correctly. I think it wasn't last year.
2 years ago.
But we had that snow
2 years ago. I remember.
in April. That was
Elijah
wild.
and I had like a snowball fight right after school.
I had a snowball fight during class.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, our teacher took us out. It was like, it was like a great experience.
That's all. Let me see if I can reorient this. Feels like we have like a new setup every other week.
Hey, that's part of being young. Really, I mean, the theme of our podcast is like being a young adult. It's like
You're moving.
you're moving and you don't have the same schedule, I hesitate to say stability because there's almost stability in how unstable things are.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get exactly what you're saying. It's like, it reminds me of like, there's this guy that I've seen on TikTok who like balance a ton of stuff that should not be balanceable. It's like, it's just kind of what you do as a young adult with your schedule because there's just so many changes coming at you at the same time that like,
and things you have to do.
yeah.
You know, where it's like if you have your 9-to-5 job, once you're done your 9-to-5 job, you take care of your family. Once you take care of your family, you're done. Like that's like a lot of adult lives. That's what it looks like, right? And there are things that pop up, but they're fairly predictable, usually. And then you budget money and time for the crises that come up from time to time.
Yeah.
But it's like for most of adults, the majority of their time is so
Uniform.
day in, day out.
Yeah.
Uniform. Fairly
Yeah.
so.
With young adults here, you're trying to get all that set up. And
It's like, oh, summer's coming around. Oh, gotta get a summer job. Oh, next semester, here's your schedule. Transferring colleges because you're, getting out of your community college. All that sort of stuff. All that noise. It's always changing, always moving. Something that really interests me about, like, this is what I've been feeling recently, specifically today. It's like, I do get bored, but I don't really have time to reflect upon my boredom often because of the way life is, But with the way, like, my day is shaken out today, I'm like, I'm just waiting for things to happen in my life.
waiting for things to happen.
Waiting to talk to my academic advisor, waiting to schedule for classes, waiting to take a test, all that sort of stuff.
I get it. You definitely do get into those waiting sort of moods where you're just like, okay, well, there's this thing coming up. I want it.
Yeah.
And I was definitely like that my senior year of high school. And it's calmed down a little bit this year, but with the school year about to end, I'm waiting for the school year to end. It's hard to believe first year of college is almost done for me. Second year for you.
Elijah was expressing something similar to me recently. It's like we're almost 2 years done for college.
You're almost halfway through your undergraduate stuff, yeah.
And really, your second 2 years of college are where you really start getting into the real stuff for your degree. For me, I'm transferring to an actual 4-year to finish out my bachelor's. Of course, it's interesting because life is full of these little milestones that make life feel quicker than it actually is. It's the way I described it to Elijah. We're talking about it. It's like the older you get, the more frame of reference you have to acknowledge the time has passed. When you're young, a year has passed whenever your birthday rolls around. Whenever you're old, a year has passed at New Year's. When your birthday rolls around, at the start of the school year, at the middle of the school year, at Christmas, Every single day means another year has passed, if that makes any sense.
No,
you have more of those moments to kind of nail that down to.
Well, I think what's interesting is, like, we always say, like, time starts going by faster as you get older just because, proportionally, a year is a smaller and smaller part of your life. But what's interesting is the frequency of milestones goes down as you get older when you think about it.
But the number of anniversaries you have for milestones goes up.
That's true.
Right? It's been this many years since I got out of high school, this many years since I got out of college.
Okay, I'm tracking with you now, yeah.
You see what I mean?
Wild.
It's like, because the rate at which time passes does not speed up. The way my mom has described it, and it feels very real, it's like the days are long, but the years are fast. And that's because, like, most adults they start living in the moment. And whenever you live in the moment, you're not focused on waiting like we are for the stuff to come.
That's what I was about to touch on, because I feel like the sort of waiting attitude that we have now, like once we get into that regular, adult routine, which of course will still have its twists and turns, once we get there, we're going to kind of lose that waiting mentality because we won't need it anymore. Because, like, as I was kind of saying, like, the milestones get less frequent. It's less about looking forward to the next milestone and more like looking back and being like, dang, it's been this many years since
I think
that.
the trick in both things, because, you know, adults oftentimes get melancholy for their youth, and they're like, oh man, I miss those days, but they forget that they were poor and that they were
Dumb.
unstable and dumb and whatever it might be. I remember my stepdad looked at me and he said, John, enjoy your high school years. They're going to be the best years of your life. I'm like, oh my God, like, how does your life have been like, if that's the case?
Yeah.
Because my high school years were not the best time of my life. Like, they weren't bad. They were good, right? They weren't bad. They were pretty darn good, all things considered. But, like, how could that be considered with all of those ups and downs, the peak of your life?
Yeah.
I think it depends on what you define to be a good life. And I don't define a good life to be necessarily freedom or necessarily, like, emptiness is a better way of putting it.
The way I like thinking about it is your life is a continuous peak. That's why, you know, when you start getting close to the summit, you get tired and you get weary and it gets harder. Because when you start at the bottom of the hill, you know, you have all your energy, and as you go on, you start losing that. And then eventually you get to the top, and then you realize, you know, that in the end it was worth it. That's kind of the way I look at it. Because I never want to reach a point in my life where I'm like, this is the peak, or that was my peak.
Well, I know I'm the type of person personally. I am never going to be satisfied with any sort of peak. I always want to be striving for something.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, like, maybe I'll reach some sort of goal, but knowing me, I will set a new one.
That's exactly what I did. Like, I made my Backrooms game, and I'm like, okay, next game.
Yeah.
But then I had to tell myself, well, now wait, hold on. That sounds cool and fun, but there are a lot of other cool and fun things you could do.
Well, have goals, but pace yourself. Right? It's not like you have to speed run all your goals.
It's not like
at the beginning of your life. I think that's a big thing too. Like, there's this big sense at our age that now's the time.
Now's the time.
Now's the time. You gotta do it all. You gotta do everything.
Before you get all those commitments, you can't do anything once you have all those commitments.
I'm not sure if your parents have been the same way, but my parents have certainly been like, this is your one shot. You better not waste it before you have like it's
before
like
you have kids.
Before you have kids, you know, all that sort of noise. The truth is, though, I don't like that mindset. Even when you have kids, even whenever you're married and you have a house payment. Never stop living.
Never stop living.
And don't treat your kids as something that's preventing you from living, because that's bad.
That is really bad.
You know?
Yeah, like, in those situations, you know, the old wisdom reigns true. It's like, you don't get time, you have to make time for whatever you're wanting to do. And you have to, you know, make sure you got your priorities straight. If your priorities are taking care of your kids, then don't feel the need to do anything ambitious besides that.
And that's not, like, a bad priority.
It's not a bad priority, you know, at all.
It really isn't.
It's a great priority.
It's a great priority. Of course, don't forget yourself. You know, I think some people, they treat raising their kids right as giving themselves up to their kids, and there is a line in the sand. I think there's so many parents who get to a point when their kids are growing up and they're like, what now? You know, what am I supposed to do with my life now? The trick is, if you give yourself to your kids, it's like giving yourself entirely to anybody. It's dangerous. You want to journey through life with your kids and be a example that they could follow.
Yeah.
You know, you don't want to just, like, teach your kids that the secret of life is raising kids. You want to be like, here, follow me. Let me show you the way. And I think many parents, it's like, because I don't think it's all, like, yes or no. It's not binary. I think a lot of parents do that in some ways and don't do it in others. But I do think there's this prevailing mentality of self-sacrifice for raising the next generation. When you should sacrifice, but you shouldn't be like, forget your ego, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. I think, speaking of, like, you know, parents serving as a role model, I love my dad. I love both my parents, but, like, my dad especially is weird because, you know, he was very much like me, but he kind of squandered a lot of his opportunities by not putting in effort, not you know, chasing his ambitions, just kind of doing the bare minimum and coasting through without any real direction. But then he overcame that and then had me, and so he sort of is a great role model for me, not only, like, in the present, but as a past example of what not to do. You know, his stories are also they serve as an anti-role model, right? Something to avoid. And I love both my parents' dynamic raising me, because I think what happened is my mom taught me how to plan for things. My mom taught me how to, you know, push forward, how to, you know, harness my abilities and do the best with what I got and move forward and have a plan for things and, you know, find success wherever I can. And then my dad, as a kind of counter to that, taught me how to move forward when plans fall through. How, you know, no matter how hard you fall, you can always get back up. like my dad was writing a book, and it took him 31 years to finish it. And the main reason he finished it is because I released my game, and he didn't want me showing him up. But, you know, even if that's what it took, he got the thing done. Despite all the setbacks he had along the way, you know, not necessarily setbacks, but the detours he had along the way, he finally, you know, got it. And so I definitely agree that, you know, parents shouldn't feel pressured to, like, you know, they shouldn't feel pressured to, you know, be ambitious, because as we've talked about, like, raising a child is a great priority to have. But at the same time, don't undervalue yourself, because if you do that, you can't be a good role model for your kids.
Yeah, very much so. And it's such a fine line to strike. I think it's definitely a spectrum, right, of self-sacrifice to neglect. And I think, as always, there's a sweet spot somewhere in the middle. And I think that is more evidence than any than in the extreme examples, right? You have the absent father and you have the helicopter mom, right? Those classic kind of binary examples, and both are very, very bad. Being it as I am in, I guess you could call it the prom world, right? And even the wedding world, sometimes scarily enough. You have young guys come in, high school age, and there's a good number of them who are fairly independent, who know how to make their own decisions, who know what they want to wear, but there's a good chunk who come in with their, you know, with their SOs or with their significant others or with their mothers in particular, and they just have no opinions because they know their mom's going to decide and make the decision for them. Or they know their parent, I should say. And I feel like I fell a little bit on the other end of the spectrum when it comes to parental supervision. I think I was mostly left alone to develop on my own because I was mostly okay. And as a result, I am very independent. I solve my own problems because I have to. But at the same time, in life, you don't want to just be always trying to solve your own problems. You need to be relying upon your support structure because you want people to rely upon you too. But even then, I would rather be too independent than too dependent.
Yeah.
It's so fucking annoying, some of these kids, man. It's like, what color tie do you want to wear? They're like... it's not a hard question, man. Bow tie or long tie? Bow tie or long tie? It's not a hard question.
I think I'm definitely tracking with you, and I'm the same way. Like once high school hit, my parents, like they I would say they were very much helicopter parents to begin with, because only child, you know, on their precious little jewel and whatnot. But you know, once high school hit, like I don't know what inspired them to do it, but like they went hands off very quickly, and so that was a good time for me to develop and become more independent and become more comfortable with things I wasn't familiar with, to become more decisive, and you know. I made my own game and everything, right? And so, and I think that was a fantastic experience to tell myself, I can do stuff. I can do stuff on my own. Now, granted, I was still doing that because, like, I was living with them and... Yeah,
it's like, you know, we talk about independence, but we're not paying our own bills yet.
Yeah.
So we're not really independent. But there is still something to be said for, you know, you got your car registered on your own.
Yeah.
Like, really, you did on your own, and that sort of thing. It's like, there's these little adulting things. Because it's like... You don't want to be thrown at the deep end of the pond.
Yeah, no, you don't.
Right? Like, I'm sure your parents co-signed for your car.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
So as much as they allow you to make your own decisions, they're still present. And it's still like that for me, too. It's just like, I kind of got that experience that you had earlier, I'd say. And that's also like the experience of having siblings.
Yeah.
Right? Being an only child, totally different.
Being an only child, it's so funny because being an only child is one of the things where, you know, people believe they're better at telling you're an only child than they really are. So if you ever tell them you're an only child, they're like, oh, that makes so much sense. But before you tell them, they have no idea.
It's yeah. Well, that's the confirmation bias. Or, hindsight bias. Where it's like, yeah, I knew that.
Yeah.
I think that's a whole different conversation. People are crazy. People are crazy in what they assume about you.
They are.
I have to constantly modulate my thoughts in that sphere. I try to be really conscious of what I'm thinking about people, and there'll be so many times where I have to be like, wait, no, that's not it. Roll that back. That's not a good thought. You know.
That's not a good thought.
Well, you know, we don't control them.
We don't control them. Indeed, that's something that I really grappled with recently. Like, just this last week, I was at church, and we're starting a new series called "Those People," where it's all about, you know, dealing with people who we generally see as toxic. It's like, what's the best way to handle that? Because you don't want to, like, treat them poorly just because you perceive them treating you poorly, but you also don't want to, like, you know, be doormat or leave something unaddressed that they would benefit from having addressed. And so I'm excited for the series that we're about to start, where we'll go through 6 different types of like people that many people perceive as toxic, how to handle that, how to help them, how to help yourself with them. And so I'm excited for that. And something that our pastor said as part of the intro to this series was that emotions are God-given. Like, those are things you can't control. You're going to have those thoughts about people. You're going to have those assumptions about people. You're going to feel a certain way about them, regardless of whether you want to or not. Regardless of whether or not you can point to a logical reason you feel that way. Like, that's how I felt about this girl that I asked out like almost 8 weeks ago now, right? And it's like, while right now I really think I'm starting to kind of turn away from her, and like I'm just willing to drop it. I keep shooting myself in the foot for feeling how I felt these last 8 weeks. Like, oh, Justin, you're so dumb. Why'd you get so invested in that up front? Like, you didn't need to do that. It's like, and like, it doesn't even matter all that much in the grand scheme of things. It's like, blah, blah, blah. But like, I can't be mad at myself for feeling how I feel, especially when I'm young. And especially when the reason I'm able to feel that way, according to my faith, is because God lets me feel things. He lets me have that
one of my
emotional attachment.
Favorite metaphors for this, it's like, I like to consider like your mind, not necessarily your brain, but more your mind, the space you inhabit in yourself is like a garden. And like any gardener, you don't necessarily control what grows, how it grows. You can cultivate certain things and plant certain seeds, but you can't expect it. You can't like plan around certain things, because things will always grow in unexpected ways. Whenever a flower or a tree or anything grows in an unexpected way, the gardener doesn't get fucking pissed off and shout at it like, "Oh, you flower, why'd you do that?" And if they did, you'd be having some questions. The gardener just nods and gets to work and adjusts it and pushes it in the right direction. It's like you're more a gardener or a shepherd of your mind more than a controller.
Exactly.
And I think
that's a really good metaphor.
It's just like there's this assumption of control, because like you're never really. It's like this selfhood, like metacognition.
Metacognition, yeah.
Is such a strange amorphous concept that of course you're never taught in school and K through 12, and most people in your life kind of, if they as they get older and they kind of grasp that, they don't really like express it. It's just something you kind of have to like come to learn. You're gonna pull out a book, aren't you?
I'm gonna pull out a book right now. Philosophy of Mind, Causation and Psychology by John Campbell. Great read. It's right now we're talking about very similar things, where it's like, what is mental causation? What does it mean to be an agent? And what does it mean to will something in your headspace? Because you can't necessarily will your emotions. You can't will your beliefs, because your beliefs are informed by tons of other beliefs, and those are informed by just information that you perceive. So like, what can you really control in the mind? What does it mean to have that control? And that specifically gets talked about a lot more in the free will class I'm going to be taking at some point. But what I find interesting about that is, as much as we like to think we have control of our headspace, no, we have access to our headspace more intimately than anyone else can. That's true, but that doesn't mean control.
The way I've kind of come to interpret selfhood is, and I forget, I may have read this somewhere, I forget if I had though. It's like, if you really take a step back, you're more like this. Like, what is the self? If you really try and isolate and identify what it is, like it almost feels like whenever you truly get up there, you're like up here. You're kind of like looking in through your mind, through your eyes, and like your brain's more of a filter for the self. And I think that has led to the natural conclusion, especially early on, of a soul. And obviously, there's a whole conversation of soulhood, of what the soul is. I tend to believe in it a little bit. But it's still so fascinating just to like, you're taught and you assume that everything that makes up your physical self, your physical space, and your physical mental space, like the electrical waves inside your brain, are you. But then
it's not.
It's not.
Yeah, like if I chop off my hands,
that hand's no longer you, or it is maybe.
Or it is maybe, exactly.
I think a better way of describing it is that it is yours.
Yes, it is yours.
You own your body. You own your mind.
Garden, yes.
You own your garden. And I think that's why it can be such a affront whenever somebody like, steps into your personal space or that sort of thing. Because it's less like, it's really hard to describe, because it's less like it's like self-defense is almost described as self. You're defending the self. When in reality, it's almost like, let me describe it this way.
Okay.
There are ascetic Buddhist monks out there who barely eat, who will accept physical harm. You've heard about the bed of nails and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of notion, because they've embraced that. Like their physical body is not them, right? And you see this serenity. Like one of the most common forms of protest from Buddhists, not common, I shouldn't say, but a surprisingly common form of protest for true Buddhists is self-immolation. Have you heard about that?
No.
They set themselves on fire. They set themselves on fire, and I think, and I'm kind of like having this conversation with them. I'm like, I guess that's because they've truly removed themselves from the notion that their body is them, right? Like actually, fairly recently, I think it was on the before the January 6th riots or insurrection, whatever, both. On the steps of the Capitol, I believe there was a Buddhist who set himself on fire in protest of like climate change policies during the Trump administration. And there's been a number of Buddhists who set themselves on fire in Tibet in protest of Chinese occupation. That's kind of crazy. That's kind of
That is kind of crazy.
But
well, but the weird thing about that I think they get wrong is, as you said, you know, like a hand that's not you, but it's yours. And you know, as a gardener, you should tend to what you have, tend to what you've been given. And like, I think that's going down a much more Christian route, because you know your body's a temple that you know you want to invite God into.
In general, I think the Buddhists would agree with you. I think when I was describing agency of your temple, of your garden, I think that protest stems from a feeling as though the agency has been stolen. Like think about the climate change protester, right? Especially like say in China, where you know in most of those big cities you're breathing in acid rain because of the lack of fucking climate controls in their factories. You know, it's like the ultimate form of protest is to, you know, in a way, because it does draw headlines, it catches attention.
Yeah.
I kind of wish people didn't do it personally, like, but I get it. It's crazy how quick death can come. That's a different conversation.
No, actually, I kind of want to talk about that, because that you know has me thinking. You know, we're talking about the self and all that. I think the scariest thing is just those times where suddenly you just realize how thin the barrier is between you and death.
I know, it's so crazy. Like I was thinking about it the other day. I'm sitting staring at I did it after the accident too. I'm sitting on my truck after the accident, and there was that door, that thin layer of I think it's old enough to be metal still, but of metal that kept me from a car hitting me and caving in my chest or breaking my spine. Like if that car had been going faster, if I had been going faster, I'd probably be dead.
Yeah.
I remember I learned this in forensics class because we were talking about ballistics. There was this kid who wasn't even like doing anything dangerous. He was sitting at a gun range. He was a shell collector for like a shooting contest. So he was running around and pick up the shells after everyone stepped away from the line. And he was just sitting there, and not even from the people in front of him who were shooting their guns, but like from the top of the building, a bullet the back of his head. Like if somebody shot in the air, and the bullet came back down and killed him. And he was doing nothing wrong. Just a random ass bullet. Like the likelihood of it happening is like, you know what I mean? It's fucking terrifying.
It's terrifying.
It's terrifying.
Meteor could hit us right now. It's like, well, there you go.
And of course, these things are very unlikely. You know, and I watched a video rather that was from, I think it was John Green or Hank Green, commenting on somebody talking about how life is being extended, and this generation, our generation, is going to break longevity records by a large margin because of how different we are living at an early age, how different we are eating, and how much less sun we're receiving. Right? We're possibly going to live to like 130s, 140s just because of how aging is changing. Right?
It's wild.
And it's like you look at that, you're like, oh, we're gonna live for that long, but that's not guaranteed.
It is not guaranteed. Yeah,
No.
like you know, yeah, it just amazes me, like how many physical processes go into keeping us alive, and how many of those will, you know, kill us if they stop. Right. Like especially in my anatomy class, we talked a lot about, you know, like how neurons transfer information. It's like, well, if you don't have enough sodium, you die. If you don't have enough potassium, you die. If you don't have enough, like it's scary. It's terrifying. If you don't have enough magnesium, you die. Like, what? Calcium, you die.
I remember in forensics we talked about overdosing, and it's like theoretically you can overdose on anything,
yeah.
right?
You know, I saw a video. It was like you can overdose on water. I'm like, I guess you could. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's just this notion that the only thing that keeps you thinking about that keeps you from thinking about death is ignorance, or willful ignorance, and I think especially for educated people, or just like, more brainy people. I'm not saying smart, but like brainy people, like thinkers. It's so easy to just like peer past that barrier of ignorance and be like, oh my god, I could die right now.
Well, yes, but I also think that it's like, if you look at it even more, it's like, well, if I die, I die, and at that point, I won't have to care about anything, and so.
But it's hard because there's this natural. Because I think that too, but there's this natural like protest. You know what I mean? Like every time, you say that, and you say that, and you can believe it logically, but then there's another party that's like, shut the fuck up! I want to live, man. You kind of know what I mean?
Well, and then the part of me that says I want to live, I'm like, okay, then let's live. Let's live as though we're about to die. Let's live as though the next decision we make is the last one we're going to get to make.
And that's such a valuable perspective. But I think that's really interesting about that. Like that point is that it could be used for such a negative worldview.
It could be, yeah.
And often is. It's like, YOLO, let's jump off this building. Or YOLO, that's the same logic used by people who are putting all sorts of, drugs into their bodies and stuff.
Yeah. Well, see, and I do think that's stupid when you take it, a gardener is not going to be like, well, there's a small chance my garden's going to just catch on fire today, so, or like a random car is going to veer off and run into it, so I'm just going to
douse it in gasoline.
Just to see what happens. That's the weird thing. I forgot what it was. There's a great quote where it's like, you have to act as though you have to act as though you'll live forever, and as though the next thing you do is going to be your last.
Exactly. Because it's really fascinating, looking at, say, from a historical perspective, looking at decision makers, leaders and stuff, on the cusp of death. The older somebody gets, the more conservative they get in their decision making. Usually because a young person classically has that kind of devil may care, I'm going to live forever attitude, but the older you get, the more kind of reserved you're no, I'm not going to live forever, let's be more careful. And I think a great example is Napoleon, right? Napoleon was this legendary military leader who just basically destroyed and dominated everyone for a period of 20 years, defined an era of history with his name. That doesn't happen, right? And yet later in his life, the Napoleon that we knew in his youth, that we knew from his youth that would have won some of these victories, didn't, because he was more reserved and more cautious and stuff. And he allowed his, maybe not fear of death, I doubt necessarily it was a fear of death, but certainly a acknowledgement of, he stopped thinking about, I'm gonna die, I want to go on a blaze of glory, I want to write my name in history. He was thinking, I want my empire to last 1,000 years. And that changes your way of thinking.
It does, when you start getting, just protective of the self.
Exactly.
It changes.
It's not even necessarily afraid of death, but just this protective rather than explosive and visionary and ambitious and risk-taking.
And I think too many people fall into the trap of protecting their garden without tending to it, right?
Expanding it, yeah. They don't expand their garden. I've often heard, we have this bubble in life. And you really want to be living, if you can, not necessarily super far out of this comfort bubble, but right outside.
Right outside, yeah.
Just expand it a little bit, And because I understand why it's super easy just to stay where you're comfortable, and oftentimes I do, but making those efforts to expand your horizons just makes your life bringing new flowers into your garden.
Makes it more interesting.
It makes it more interesting.
More beautiful. And sometimes, you gotta be careful because bringing this kind of flower,
invasive species.
Like a weed will start spreading. But, you can't really anticipate that until you see it. So,
you might bring in a rose, you might bring in a Japanese vine. It's you don't know until you try, though.
Yeah. And then you have to trust yourself to be able to cut something out if you need to.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's another thing that a lot of people do. They don't realize what they need to cut out of their garden. And that's actually exactly what Those People series that want to start at my church is all about. It's you gotta figure out what you gotta cut out sometimes. And it's hard because you can get attached to it even if you recognize it has its problems. But, you'll be so much happier and you won't have to be so, scared of it once it's gone.
It's kind of coffee for me. And coffee is not necessarily an inherently bad thing, but there can be, in anything, a bad habit derived from something that might be good for you. It's I probably drank a little bit too much coffee. Not as much as some people I know, but, probably too much. And it's if I just took the simple modification of my behavior and, say, restricted myself to, a cup a day or something like that, my life would be better. But I'm more comfortable in living as I am now, and I am able to live as I am now without significant consequence in the present. right? I think it's like, you talked earlier about living as though you're going to die tomorrow, living as though you'll live forever. It's like, it's really easy to let these small, subtle, seemingly insequential things stack up and build up,
It really is. And that's another thing that's almost scary, but fascinating, is just how every decision, no matter how minute, can just have drastic ramifications.
Well, it's like the flap of a butterfly's wings,
Yeah.
right? It's like, I wanted to stay up late tonight, which means I'm tired tomorrow, which means my sleep schedule is messed up, which means I'm tired for my final, which means I get a bad grade or something like that.
Yeah, I just, and I think, recognizing that just makes every decision all the more meaningful, because it's not necessarily that each decision has inherent value in its own. It's that each decision,
informs every other.
Yeah, and so much like, that causation and psychology book, much like we talk about how mental states inform one another, which, you can have some sort of willful control over, but it's not nearly as precise as you might think, because everything is, serves a functional role with lots of other things. It's still important because, a small change in one thing, one behavior, one intention, one desire can just, cause this whole nexus of other events.
I think that's an interesting perspective, because, there'll be times in conversations like these where I'm like, how is it that there are people who are so ignorant of the notion of gardening and the metaphor that we've developed, but still live these perfectly happy lives? And it's in the same way that you might find a garden ugly, but a wild patch of woods absolutely breathtaking. It's like, I think that, as always, there's a balance to be struck between letting yourself live and letting yourself, stumble into consequence, and letting yourself maybe let a part of your garden grow unkempt and natural, and then tending to it. There's just such a line to strike, because it's like, there's no perfect way of living life, right? And I think every person has to find their balance, but it's just so tough how it could feel like, though you may be trying to discover and consciously thinking and consciously working towards something better, but you still feel like you're where you began. I think it's because the more you know that you don't know, right? That's one of those classic paradoxes.
Our good friend Evan's birthday was yesterday, and got him this cool hoodie with a picture of Socrates, and it says "Know Nothing" on it.
Is he a philosophy major?
Yes, philosophy and religion major. I'm a philosophy minor, but I really like the philosophy and religion department at Drury, though. I would highly recommend taking a couple of I would highly recommend a minor for you.
I would love to take a minor in philosophy. I will say, when it comes to Drury, I've recently sat down like the entry advisor and talked to her about cost and such, and I'm just gonna discuss it openly. I don't really care about my finances being public, but it's like, overall tuition for Drury is like $30,000, which is average private university cost. I would get like $20,000 of scholarships after academic, after early bird, after my mom went there, so I get a small scholarship from Legacy. That would still leave I think it was like $9,500, and then
that's about what I'm paying.
Or more like $10,000 probably. Was it like $10,000 or was it like $12,000? It's something like in the $10,000 range after fees, and then I qualify for $7,000 of federal loans. More than I thought. For some reason, I thought I only qualified for $1,000. I read that wrong. That's a way different number. But I still have to pay $4,000 out of pocket. It's like, oh my god, that's a lot of money. You talk all this smoke. I talk all this smoke, and I sit down. And I'm like, oh my gosh, because I'd have to pay that out of pocket or take private loans, right? So I'm actually talking to both an MSU counselor and jury counselor, just trying until I navigate where I want to go. But I may end up going to MSU after all, because I can.
It would be sad. We would love to have you at jury.
I would love to be a jury.
Yeah.
I would love to. And I talked to my mom about it, and despite all the loans that she has, she's told me that she does not regret going one bit. Especially since I'd be able to be more active. I doubt I would either. It's just this interesting, being where I am and being a young person, right? Back to the theme, back to that core theme. It's like I have all these different perspectives of advice that are thrown at me. It's like, this is the right decision. This is the right decision. Oh, there's no right decision. And I'm like, oh my god. And you just gotta make a call. And sometimes you can, certain decisions, people will tell you, oh, you should feel guilty for making that decision.
No, if you're making a decision while trying to be informed by the advice of others and considering your needs and wants in that moment, that's fine. A big thing we talk about our church is how, desires are very flimsy. They can change on a dime. And sometimes if we commit to a desire and see it as something that's permanent, that can lead to bad ramifications in the future. Um, and like in these sorts of situations, it's like, you know, to avoid analysis paralysis, you have to accept that you want what you want when you want it, especially as a young person, and you know, you should feel free to like chase after that, as long as you know you're trying to be as informed as you can. And then looking back on it, if you realize you made a wrong decision, or if the decision turned out poorly, that's the thing. If the decision turns out poorly, that doesn't mean it was the wrong decision. Because given what you knew and what you wanted, that was the best decision for you in that moment.
That's true.
You have to accept that, you know, you're limited by your own ignorance whenever you're making a decision.
I think that it's very easy, very possible, in fact, very feasible in high school to make all the right decisions. You know what I mean? Like, in a way, because life is so much simpler. And not necessarily simpler in a good way, but just simpler in general. You have less... Yeah. For your average person, you have less decisions and less factors going into what you're deciding. It's like it's easier to make the right call. And then that time rolls around where it's like, are you going to college? What college are you going to? What are you majoring in? It's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
The gray opens up.
Gray opens up.
Right? It's like in high school, it's like take all the hard classes, get A's, go to school, do sports, I guess. That's it. Like, and then you're living a pretty good life. And you're not doing anything too bad. As long as you're not like a terrible person in your social life. And then it opens up, and the world opens up, and this is the way life is going to be for the rest of your life. There is never going to be the right call. There will always be bad calls.
Yes,
and the bad calls are going to be way easier to spot than all the good calls, because I think people, they always sit down and like take stock whenever things are bad, but they never do it when it's good.
That's something I've actually started doing though. Trying to take stock when things are good, because that's also something we talk about in the church a lot. It's like, you know, don't just come to God whenever you're feeling bad. Remember to come to Him when things are going good.
Thanks, man.
Give Him thanks, praise Him, and you know, because the more you come into Him, the more you try to keep Him in the process of you having your decisions informed and stuff. The more you approach Him, the better decisions you're going to make, even if the ones that you've been making have been really good and working out, right?
Yeah.
Like more of that is good. You don't want this sort of stop and go sort of process where it's like, all right, God, I need your help. Thanks. Great decision. I'm going to keep going with as much juice as you gave me, and I'm not going to ask for more until I run out of gas, right? So you don't want to get into that cycle of, you know, only looking for that advice, only looking to be well informed when you have a big decision coming up or a hard decision coming up. You kind of want to have that habit of going to people even for smaller things, or even for things that, you know, you think you have control over, or that is like, oh, like I want to go out with this person, mom, dad, is that okay? Like, that's a pretty big decision. But even for things like, would it be wise for me to you know, buy this car or this car, or would it be wise for me to hang out with this person? Like, you know, I think even when you're fully confident in your ability to make a good decision, ask for help. Even if things are going well, ask for help. Ask your friends, you know, if they need help.
Yeah.
Things like that. And I think, you know, too many people get into this mindset where it's like, once they're coasting, once they're cruising, they just kind of put on cruise control and
coast.
And the coast.
It's like, I think it's definitely a difference in mentality. You know, it's the striving versus... It's like, I think there's a lot of people, and it's not an inherently bad position to be in, where you get to a place where you want to stay and you want to stay there. But I think what's really interesting about life is that it's inherently going to end.
Yeah.
You know, and everything's going to end. So, you know, if you get to a job you like, and you're like, I'm going to be here for the rest of my career, and then the company goes down, it's like, you should never, ever just be complacent. You can be content, but don't be complacent.
Yeah.
I think is the right way of looking at it.
Very much so.
Because I think complacency just makes the world worse for people who are striving, right? It's like, you know, if you ever gone to a workplace before, or just like any, like a restaurant, a school, or a retail place, and the person there just hates their job. The first thought I always have is like, why are you here? And, you know, there could be a good reason. It's like, I need the money because I have kids and I have to pay the bills or some whatever. But even in those situations, you know, it feels like you're disservicing yourself to at least not be making the best of it.
And that's exactly it. It's like,
right?
You know...
And, of course, that does come from a place of privilege. I've never really lived in that sort of dark place, like being stuck in debt or, you know, not being able to pay the bills. I've never been there. I've always lived at home, so I have to say that to put a grain of salt in there. But I think that, like, there's something very powerful about, even in super shitty situations, just embracing them for what they are.
Gratitude is just so important in anything. It's like, whether you're religious or not religious, like, obviously as a Christian, like, I give God thanks for even the situations that I don't like. Like, past 8 weeks I've been thanking God for this chance to, have all these awkward feelings about this girl, to go from, oh, I have a crush on her, to, oh, you know what, I'm going to ask her out because I really feel like that's what God's laying on my heart, to now going like, well, she said she'd get back to me. She hasn't. I'm pretty sure it's no, but I don't want to make the decision for her. And, like, I keep, overanalyzing it. And recently, in the last couple of weeks, I've kind of got to that point where I'm just like, doesn't really matter.
I'm tired of worrying about it. I'm tired of thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm tired of thinking about it. Like, I've kind of exhausted that. And so I'm just like, you know what, God? I thank you for using this as an experience for me to build patience. And I thank you for, putting that person in my life, because I still enjoy them as a person. But I also, thank you for helping me kind of chill out about it and help.
I think one of the biggest difficulties, just in general in life, is, and even it doesn't have to be necessarily just in a romantic sense, but just loving somebody who doesn't love you the same. Whether it's a friend, whether it's a family member, whether it's a possible romantic partner. Because it's a pain that, because, love, especially when you're young, it feels... You know what? No, I'm not going to add that caveat, because I don't know what it's like to be old. Love in general, though, is like such an overpowering, especially romantic love, just all-consuming emotion that, it feels, especially when it's fresh, when it's new, dictates almost every waking moment of your thought, of your concern, of your stress. And to feel that intensely for someone, something, and then have that not reciprocated, and if not disrespected, does suck. I think what is unfortunate, and it's fortunate in your case, it's unfortunate that some people, and perhaps understandably, but it's still unfortunate they take that rejection, they take that emotion, that sadness, that agony of not having reciprocation, and then they, like, turn it, and they lash out with it. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, I think, for me, like, my breakup was just a big moment for me to, like, work on myself.
Well, that's exactly what I've been inspired to do, because, like, after the first couple weeks, I was like, okay, I'll still give her time to come to me, like, in her own time, so that I don't want to make the decision for her, but it really feels like a no. So for now, I'm gonna kind of act like it's a no and work on myself, and then that means if she ever does get back to me, well, hey, look at that, I'm better, and then if she doesn't, look at that, I'm better, right?
Yeah.
And so whether it's better for her or better for someone else, or even just better for me, like, it's fine. And I really like how you bring up how painful it is, to love someone in a way that they can't reciprocate, because that is a huge underlying thing in Christianity.
It's not always their fault, it really isn't.
Well, it's not. Well, that's something to consider. But back to where I was saying, like, a huge thing about Christianity is that God loves us more than we could ever love Him back, and I think it's very interesting how we experience that ourselves because of how powerful our love is just for other people. We can get all these other powerful negative emotions if that's not reciprocated. And so I think about, how powerful God's love is if He can love us all so much, even if we don't love Him back, even if we're trying to love Him back, we just can't do it on the level He loves us. I think it's very inspiring, even for people who don't believe in God. Just because, like, the love that they have is, it's shared. Those kinds of feelings are shared.
I saw, I wanted to watch a movie for my geography class. It was called The Look of Silence. And I didn't even know about this, but there was, in the 1960s, a genocide in Indonesia, which is a country that makes up an island chain in the Southeast Pacific. And long story short, Cold War was happening, communism was spreading in a traditionally very Muslim, very religiously conservative place on the earth, and a failed coup from the communists led to political violence in return that turned into a genocide. And all of these local, from what I understand, a whole bunch of local perpetrators were basically given license by the government to kill communists, even suspected communists. And this guy, because, like, it's such a dark period in their history, so it's one of those things where people don't talk about it. He was going around, he's an optometrist, and he'd be giving old people appointments. And whenever in that silence, he'd ask them about what they had done, about how they'd, like, killed. And he interviewed this one guy and his daughter. And he talked about how he took a Chinese woman to the river, and this is really graphic, so if you don't want to listen to this, please don't. Slit her throat, chopped off her head, took the blood from her and drank it, and then took the head to, because it was a Chinese woman, to a Chinese community and then terrorized them with it. And he said it like with the casualness of commenting on the weather. And after that story was told, the daughter, said, "Please forgive him. He's senile. He doesn't know himself. We lost our mother a long time ago." And the guy who was interviewing, who had lost his brother during this genocide, stood up, walked across the room and hugged him, shook his hand, and left. I don't know if I could have done that. It's like the amount of love you have to have in your heart to be able to do something like that.
And that's exactly what's talked about, in Christian circles. Is like, how do you show that kind of love, right? Because that's the love that's been shown to us. How can we best reciprocate this love that we can't reciprocate? And not just like us reciprocating it with God, but like us reciprocating God's love for us isn't showing Him love. It's like directly as you would show someone else love. It's showing others love to glorify Him, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what gets me so mad about a lot of the some denominations and some circles of Christianity that are more focused on the fear component of Christianity and the love component. Because in a way, okay, don't take this out of context because it sounds really bad. In a way, love is fear, in a very strange way.
No, I think I can kind of see that. I'm not sure. The emotions themselves are certainly different, but I think that there is, in the depth of an all-powerful love, is an all-encompassing fear. Because whenever you love something so much, there has to be a vulnerability for you to showcase that.
Exactly, and that's what I'm kind of getting at. It's like fear is
fear and love are hand in hand. Maybe not the same, but they certainly are literally right next to each other.
Yeah, because I love how you brought up vulnerability. That's just it. Fear is feeling vulnerable when you don't want to be, whereas love is feeling vulnerable when you do want to.
And they can often turn into one another. They can,
yeah. Like just with this girl. I went from having the feels for her, and now I'm like, oh no, does she hate me? Do
I'm not even sure the mic picked that up. Yeah, my phone notification is the Metal Gear Solid alert sound that just went off.
But that was fantastic timing.
It's a great.
Yeah, like, does she hate me? Or something I worry about is like, did me opening up to her make her just intensely scared of me, or because they always tell you you got to be careful when you ask someone out, because if it's a no or if things become awkward, then you could lose a friendship. And that unfortunately,
it's really crazy is that you lose the friendship as soon as you start feeling feelings for them. In a way, you don't, but you do in a way, because how can you see what I mean?
I do see what you mean.
As soon as you start feeling something for somebody, it's never gonna be the same. You could pretend.
Man, you're kind of right.
You could pretend, but it doesn't work out.
It doesn't. Oh man, you're right.
Until you open that, it can go back to normal if you open it up and both parties agree it can. But if you feel something for somebody, pretending it's not there, it's just gonna make it fucking worse.
Oh, you're kind of right. Yeah.
Did it blow your mind just then?
You did just blow my mind, because no, that makes so much sense. Once those feelings are there, it's like the dynamic of that friendship fundamentally changes.
And it's not your fault. It's not their fault.
And that's the thing. It's nobody's fault.
It just happens.
It just happens.
And
so that's why we have to guard ourselves from getting super upset if those feelings aren't reciprocated, because.
And it's such hard advice to follow, and I've struggled to follow it. And obviously, I don't have a lot of experience because I've only been in 2 relationships. My second one's still working out, but that first step of opening up is so important, because either it works out or it doesn't. And if it doesn't work out and it goes bad, then maybe they wouldn't have been the best friends either.
Well, and that's kind of what I've been realizing for the last few weeks. It's how distant this girl has been since I asked her out is really kind of telling. Where it's like, if this is how she handles these kind of awkward situations, if this is how uncomfortable she feels about me, or at least about what I said, it's like maybe even if I hadn't had these feelings, this wouldn't have been a very fulfilling friendship. Not because either of us is in the wrong, just because the way we interact never would have been as natural as say Evan and I, or you and I.
Well, yeah, very much so. It's like I think people, especially, like, and I think certain, like, societies, certain people, certain groups, certain friend groups are better about it than others, but, like, everyone has hidden feelings that they don't express towards others. And sometimes it's not a bad thing, because sometimes there's, like, things that you think that you don't believe and that would be unconstructive, that would just be damaging. But oftentimes it's more so that people are afraid to express what they really feel, and a house built on cards is going to collapse.
Yeah.
Right? I think that maybe it's not, like, you could have had a wonderful friendship with somebody, but you'll never have a truly deep friendship unless they're willing to be vulnerable and willing to embrace that uncomfortability that comes from being vulnerable. Right? Friendship is a word that is often conflated with friendly acquaintance. Right? There's a difference between being a friend with somebody and being a friendly acquaintance.
There is. A very, very big difference, in fact, yeah. Like you said, there's a factor of that vulnerability in there, and it is a form of love, right? You're still, like, it's not quite as big as a romantic commitment, but
yes.
You're still making a commitment of time and of because vulnerability is in a way a commitment.
And we're not at a point in our lives necessarily where it's like we're using our support structure nearly as much, but it's like, friendship is like later in life. It's like, hey man, I need $1,000, and certainly you shouldn't make a habit of asking, of like, loaning your friends money, especially don't pay you back. But it's like, hey, I need $1,000, no questions asked, and it's like, you know what? Okay, yeah, I can do that for you if I'm in a place to. And it's like, I think, or it's like, hey, I'm at the airport and I need to be picked up, or hey, I'm blasted drunk and I need a safe driver. It's one of those things where it's somebody you feel like you could be vulnerable to and they won't stab you in the back.
Yeah.
You don't, like, it's really interesting because in a society that builds itself up more and more, I hesitate to say capitalistically, but certainly materialistically, I think that real friendships become rarer.
It has. It has, yeah.
I don't necessarily think, I think friendships have always existed. I think that true friendship is more rare because it's much more common to have reciprocal sort of, like, modest, not even necessarily monetary, but situations going on. It's like, you scratch my back, I scratch yours, more so than if you fall down, I'll pick you up. Right? It's like, true friendship in my mind is Samwise being like, hey Frodo, you don't want me to carry the ring? Okay, get on my back. And like, I'll follow you to Mordor and back.
Yeah. I do think true friendship is where you start losing the need for reciprocity. It
is. It's like you don't feel like you need to talk to them every day or anything. It's just like you're friends with them, and they'll be there when you need them, and you'll be there when they need you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought I said the same thing twice in two different ways. I'm like, wait a minute.
No.
But
kicking stuff.
I think it's like anything. You don't really. Friendships are best forged, and relationships are best forged when times are hard. Because anyone can be friends with anybody when times are easy.
Yeah.
Anyone can be friends with anybody, or in a relationship with anyone when times are easy. In that honeymoon phase, it's whenever the first bills start to roll in, and you have kids. That's why it sucks, right? I think. Yeah. I genuinely think this. Yeah. That social norm that used to be like you didn't move in together till you're married. It's like, if you're only dating casually, right? You'll never actually know who they are until after you're married.
I've talked about that with my parents.
It's like, it can work out, but it doesn't always.
What my parents say is like, what you have to do is, with dating, you have to make sure that you're opening yourself to doing activities that you would have to do as though you're living together. So it's like, come over to their house, help them do dishes every now and then, or like go to the laundromat with each other, or cook a meal together.
So here's the biggest thing, the reason, like, culturally the biggest reason that like men and women weren't supposed to move in together before marriage is because of virginity. It's because
well, yeah,
and I'm not usually like a big like feminist theorist, but genuinely patriarchal societies developed to ensure the straight bloodline of men, right? They're like, I want to keep my last name. And it used to be that in hunter-gatherer societies, it's like the first and most important thing wasn't necessarily a bloodline or name, but it was genetic variability, right? And you didn't get that from just having one person, one partner all the time, right? It was like, in a band of 50 people, you need to have genetic variability of other bands so you don't inbreed and die. But whenever you start settling, and you get more and more people, and you're more concerned of inheritance being split up amongst people you don't care about, and it's like, we got to control where this is happening. And it's easier, and that's why these societies develop to like kind of make this mandate women from doing that. And we kind of are seeing the inheritance of that, like a straight inheritance from Mesopotamia, to the kingdom of the kingdom of David, Israel, to Western Christianity, to us, right? And if your social value is not that you can't have sex before marriage, then there really isn't a lot of reason that you shouldn't be able to move in with somebody before marriage, right? And if that's your value, that's fine, right? I'm not gonna dog you for that, but I'm just saying I feel like that's the root reason that people are against moving in before marriage, because outside of that, there's no real.
So what my parents always say is the reason you shouldn't move in before marriage is to avoid temptation and make it easier, so that doesn't sneak its way into the relationship or make you do something you don't regret. And my parents admit it is a huge risk. Even if you date someone for a few years, if you don't know what they're really like on a day-to-day basis, it is pretty shocking. But especially in Christian circles, the thought is you pray to God to bring you to someone who you can function with and to trust him and trust what he's laying on your heart, and to trust, to ask him for good judgment and to enact that. And so in Christian circles especially, one of the reasons it's so important to not move in with each other until you're married is avoiding temptation, not giving the devil room to play. But also just the value of monogamy, the value of that is so that you two can raise kids together to show them as much of God's love as you're able, so that they can do that when they go out into the world and start doing things.
I'm not necessarily what's the right way of putting this? Sexual liberation type of person. I personally genuinely think do whatever you want, whatever makes you happy. I think that there are probably ways, having been a child of divorce, there are probably methods of being in a relationship that lead to more stable households for kids. Monogamy is probably one of those things. So I'd agree with you there. But I don't necessarily place any value on the idea of sex before marriage. Because I think that value, as we've discussed in the past, is not necessarily. If you look at all of the different societies across, at the complex societies that developed in the different river valleys across the globe, that is a value that developed after they became complex societies, isolated from Christianity. In my mind, that doesn't necessarily place implicit value in it as a moral right, but more it places it as a cultural value that developed from humans wanting to, like I said, maintain their bloodline, right? And in that context, I don't necessarily think that it is inexorably tied to the Word of God that was something that was he said, because I genuinely think the Bible is a mired translation of things he probably, if he did say it, mired translations of things he said through the lens of the culture at the time. And I don't necessarily place a lot of value in certain things. Of course, then it becomes a question of what is what he said and what is.
I was about to say, it's that's a
question
slippery,
for that's a slippery slope, and I'm not asking for you to engage in that.
Okay,
I'm not trying to convert you or anything.
Okay,
that's my belief because I'm not a theologian. I'm not a theist, so I don't engage in this slippery slope because I don't believe it in the first place, right? But I do think that's why it's difficult.
Well, from a logical perspective, we can throw out the conversation of maintaining bloodlines, in most families nowadays. I think the value I see in it is, again, avoiding temptation, but with sex before marriage, it's we do believe that sex is something sacred, and that it two flesh become one, and it is a different expression of the love God gave us, and it is an expression of sex is an expression of commitment, and I think that's the underlying thing. It's not really I can see how there will be cultural influences on that.
I think at the root of the conversation, right, is because I don't necessarily dog you for wanting to save yourself from marriage or anyone for doing that, right? I don't think that's an inherently bad thing. I'm talking the root of the conversation. Remember, was moving in before marriage, right? And I get the notion that you're because especially if that is your value of sex before marriage as a Christian, that moving in together would be more temptation because that's just how humans work.
That's just how humans work.
But at the same time, I guess that my understanding of how relationships can break up if they're not properly, if you don't know, is a greater possible detriment than the alternative.
And I get what you're saying.
You know what I mean? That's where I focus on, not necessarily the moral or the value of that, because I can definitely see that. Right, I'm just talking about
that makes sense.
The moving in stuff.
Yeah, because a relationship could easily be more damaged by, getting married, moving in together, finding out, oh, I don't like this person when they're at home.
Mm-hmm.
It could be more damaged by that than, having sex, realizing, oh, snap, we're going to have a kid. Let's go get married now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I definitely see how
both situations can be bad,
there.
right?
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. Both situations can be really bad.
Yeah.
And there's not necessarily a perfect solution.
I don't
right?
know. I think the one of the reasons I lean so hard toward the side of, just make sure you really trust them before you get married and then move in together. The reason I side toward that is because I feel like, especially if you're asking God for guidance and trust, again, Christian perspective, you reach a point in that relationship with them where that no matter what comes up, barring some complete psychological breakdown on their end or your end, that you will love them through whatever.
And I think that I think that a true relationship, you fall in and out of love, you will always be friends with them, right? And you'll always love them, but you'll fall in and out of like romantic sort of love. I do genuinely think that, just because that's kind of like how humans work. They're kind of like an ebb and flow. You're never going to have a perfect perpetual state of perfect bliss. That was a very alliterative sentence. But I do think, where was I before the alliteration? I think that you'll fall in and out of love with somebody, and I think that acknowledging that and finding somebody you're willing to work with is important. And I don't necessarily think in the majority of circumstances, unless you're a very surface level person, like discovering some of the habits of somebody that you live with will break the relationship. It's less that. In my mind, moving into somebody is emerging, and this is a purely almost like cynical examination of it.
Okay, that's
but
fair.
It's like one of the truest merging of not just your social romantic lives, but your financials.
That's true.
Right? Because of course, when you get married, your financials merge. Like your debt becomes their debt, that sort of thing, and that's the law. But it's like the thing that I think breaks relationships more than like saying not leaving the toilet seat down is like, oh, you just spent $20,000 on a handbag. It's like, oh God, and you don't really kind of get to examine that until you live with somebody. Like, it's like, are they going to cook dinner whenever you just worked? Are you going to cook dinner for them? Because it's not just a one-way street. I think that's just one of those areas where we'll like, I don't think there's an inherently perfect way, and it's kind of like you live your best way, and if it works for you, awesome. Because there's no guarantee that any relationship's going to work out, even if you plan it perfectly.
Yeah.
It's not like necessarily that the kind of advent, the new social norm of moving in with somebody before you marry them has necessarily like led to a percentage increase in happiness over this. It's not like it's not like a perfectly quantifiable, measurable thing.
It most certainly is not. Humans are very good at not being quantifiable, despite also sometimes being statistics, which is something I find odd. Right? Like,
missed a call from you.
You sure did.
I thought maybe got a text from Randy, but no, that's missed a call from you.
That's actually something we're talking about a lot in that causation and psychology book. You see, as much as we try to quantify ourselves and derive, mental causation and psychological tests, like, oh, do people who recognize an artist judge the art differently than people who don't recognize the artist? Stuff like that. We try to find causation between mental variables, much like we do with physical variables. Like if you throw salt into water, what happens, right? And I think something very interesting that the book has pointed out is that that's not really how it works with people. People, for whatever reason, even above other creatures, just seem to operate on such a different level, in such a different, more abstract way, where we can't isolate their mental variables because they're so interconnected. They're woven into this tapestry that we can't seem to dissect in any way, like we could a physical system, which is something that I just think is very fascinating that this book is bringing up, because it's not necessarily advocating for like a soul, but it's just advocating for the sheer difficulty of understanding
the individuality, the uniqueness of the human experience.
Yeah.
It is very interesting.
And it's starting to dive into stuff like qualia and consciousness. And like, what does it even mean to like taste something or to see something?
I will say two things.
How does that happen?
Kind of want to start wrapping up soon because I got to take the dog out soon anyway. It's been about an hour.
Indeed.
Any other big topics you want to?
Well, we had the economics thing that we never got to.
Yes! Yes!
What have I begun?
Okay, so I've learned in my economics class a little bit more about how the deficit worked. So essentially, let's start with something simple and work our way to the complex.
Okay.
So, in general, do you know what the deficit is?
The federal deficit?
Mm-hmm.
I do not. Go. Explain it first.
So we have a budget,
Yes.
right? We have a certain amount of revenue, a certain amount of expenditure. The federal deficit is the notion that the United States, after the budget is all said and done, is running at a deficit. The federal deficit is like, I think, a kind of a shorthand for saying the federal deficit debt, like how much debt we're in. And the deficit, as you know, has like been breaching new records, super, super low, because we've been deficit spending for like the past 20 years or something like that. So how does the deficit work? It's debt. But how does America have debt? A U.S. Treasury bond. A U.S. Treasury bond is something that an individual, company, or anybody could buy, usually banks, that kind of says, I'm buying this much of the debt, and then I can sell it later for a profit because the debt is going up. I'm actually not quite sure how people sell it for a profit. I think the notion is that the government will buy it back for a profit. Anyway, usually what happens is that people will buy a treasury bond, and it has to do something called maturing. It has to wait a certain number of years so they can accrue interest so they can sell it. So every year, everyone who has their matured treasury bonds sells them. Where does the government get the money if they're running at a deficit, if they're already borrowing money to pay for their other expenditures, to pay these treasury bonds that are being cashed in?
More bonds.
They sell more bonds. They go into debt to pay their debt. Now, okay, I don't know if you know much about finance, but that's about, like, if you're talking about individual finance, that's like peak stupidity. You don't do that.
You don't take out loans to pay off.
Of course, there is something called refinancing, which is essentially that where you kind of like you refinance with better credit to get a better interest rate. Maybe you take it a bit more money, but it's not quite refinancing, because they're not necessarily taking out a better interest rate per se. They're literally just making more debt to sell debt, right? But here's the difficult thing about it. The U.S. government controls how much money is in the U.S. economy through monetary policy, printing of money, right? They print the money, they print all that sort of stuff. Usually the only way that government money enters into the market of the United States for people to use and like use in the GDP and that sort of thing is through spending. They're like, I'm going to build this road, here's this money to do it, or here's a grant for this, whatever, government spending. But if you think about it, the debt is being turned into money that personal households and companies and banks can utilize. I'm not sure, you're not making a face, so you're not quite grasping this. The government goes into debt, money that does not theoretically exist because they needed to borrow it from somebody. But then it turns into real money because they sell it to themselves. Does that make any sense?
It's starting to get there now.
Kind of picking it up. So it's like, okay, well, let's like draw a little diagram in the air. So here's the government, right? Here's
high government.
Here's an individual.
High individual.
The government sells. They go into debt. This money they don't have. They had to borrow.
Yeah.
So it technically doesn't necessarily. It's not money they have to just give out and spend. It's not like they have the actual dollar. They just say, I owe you this much money.
Okay.
So they sell it to somebody, and they give them the money. They wait 10 years for it to mature. The government then has to cash out money that they don't have to somebody that then turns into real money.
Yeah.
That they can spend.
Yeah.
I just don't even. I don't even think I'm explaining it right, because it's kind of like esoteric nonsense.
It really is.
It's like black magic where money spawns. It's like Gmod, and you're like duplicating money.
Well, no, it's at the level where it's so abstract that
it doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
It literally doesn't.
Yeah.
Like I'm in economics right now, and so much of it is like, this is not real stuff.
This is not real
like, okay,
stuff.
so basic economics is like supply and demand. Here's the optimal amount of output for the desired amount of input. Stuff that makes sense. But as soon as you start talking about the fucking treasury and federal debt, I can understand how, because there are people who spend their entire lives studying the economy, and really, they can only theorize as to how it works. It's like a man-made construction that no one knows how it works. That dictates the entirety of people's well-beings and lives.
It's like the YouTube algorithm. It's like once it reaches a certain point of complexity, it's like we can't understand it.
It's literally a man-made thing that people don't know how it works anymore, but it makes everything go round. It just blows my mind. It's like people will claim they know how it works, but they really don't, because they're like anything. It's like how there's quantum theory and the theory of relativity that don't work together. There are supply side economics and then demand side economics and Keynesian economics and laissez-faire economists. I'm saying that wrong. And they all believe it works in a different way. And if they all believe it works in a different way, then none of them are probably right. That means no one fucking knows how it works. Because really all it is a bunch of billions of human beings spending money, making decisions, interacting with incredibly complex government organizations that wield a bunch of power over those decision-making processes. Oh my god, I'm getting oh my nose.
Well, I think it's becoming even worse nowadays because now that everything's like moving to electronics, like, you know, money isn't even like tangible. Like, you know, it was liquid before, but like it's becoming less liquid somehow.
No, it's becoming like it's like
or not less liquid, like more liquid. Where like literally your well-being is determined by a number stored on some computer.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like what does the Dow going down actually mean? And then you have to have like a 4-hour lecture about what it means for you. It's like, I'm sure you've heard, maybe seen headlines about how the Fed is raising interest rates. Essentially what's happening is that the Dow doesn't actually control, I used to think this, so you might think it, you might think they control interest rates that banks loan out, right? Like they control the interest rates that banks are able to do car loans and housing loans, but no, they actually control the interest rates on federal treasury bonds. But banks, the primary way they make money, stable money, is from treasury bonds. So it's not that like the Fed controls interest rates, it's that the Fed controls interest rates that the banks use to pay you. So they modify their it's like somebody changing a number for something that you'll never see or buy in your lifetime affects your ability to go get groceries.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Even here's what really boggles my mind. It's not necessarily that economics is like fake, but more so it's just detached. It's so detached from the actual like thing. You know, here, because, okay, little history lesson for you. And first off, let's explore economic concept. Do you know what a bubble is? An economic bubble.
Something that can burst.
So an economic bubble, and I'm not sure if I'm going to explain this right, it's essentially where, let me give a real life example. It's not something that actually happened. We'll just use this first. So, how much are you willing to pay for these starbursts?
Okay, I think I get what we're talking about. So in economic bubbles where people keep saying something's worth more and more.
Well, it's not necessarily the saying it's worth more and more.
They sell it to each other for more.
So it's like, okay, so wait a minute. You're willing to pay $50 for this deal. And the player's like, wait, you paid $50 for that? Oh, and then you're like, okay, but I'll sell it for $60. Oh, I bought it for $60. I bought this for $60. I'll sell it for $70. And the actual value, inherent actual value of the item is being risen much above its actual quantifiable literal value to a human being. The housing bubble was where people were utilizing houses not as, like, they weren't buying and selling houses and saying, oh, this house is so valuable because it has this many baths. They're saying houses are a repository for generational wealth because they grow in value over time. If you buy a house, you'll basically be able to reap your investment how many ever years later, so on and so forth. It's like you're investing, it's like an investment. So there's, back in the olden times of early economic theory, of this like early empires, the formation of early complex states, there was something called the South Sea Bubble. So essentially, what empires would do is they would reward people, specifically powerful noblemen usually, with monopolies. Basically, they'd say, you're the only one that's allowed to trade in this area, and we'll enforce it with the might of our navy. So, for example, the British had a monopoly over the Indian market, all the spices, all the luxury goods that flowed from there, and able to charge a premium to other countries for those goods that they desperately wanted, like tea or spices or anything like that. So, having a monopoly was an incredibly valuable thing, and people would pay a lot of money to get one and pay a lot of money to be able to trade inside a monopoly, and investing inside a company that had a monopoly was seen as a very good investment because obviously they're going to make a lot of money. The British Empire, I forget the guy's name, but they gave this guy a monopoly to the South Sea, the North Sea between North America and Atlantic, the South Sea between South America and Africa. And they said, you're the only ones allowed to trade here. The only issue was that, do you know who owned South America at that time?
The British?
The Spanish, who were enemies of the British. The British weren't allowed to trade in South Spain. They had the monopoly. But these people were like, oh, this new company's got a monopoly. And the company's like, here, we'll sell you some stocks for our company. People are like, oh, that's crazy good. You're going to make a ton of money. I'll make a big return on investment. So they'd buy stocks. And people will be like, oh, that's really cool, I want to buy that. Can I buy it from you? Or they buy it from them for a higher cost. And the cost kept getting driven up because people kept selling it for higher and higher and higher and higher and higher. Until eventually people realized,
wait, this isn't really all that valuable.
wait a minute, this company's not making any money. They don't have any boats, they don't have any trade, they don't have any monopolies. Everyone who owns it's got to sell it right away. So a burst happens. It's like a run on a bank. Everyone sells what was thought to be such a high value, but since they're all selling it at once, making supply go way up, and since people are realizing it doesn't have any value, they can't sell it for anything. So all the people who bought at the end of the bubble suddenly lose all their fucking money. Right?
And then depression.
Mm-hmm.
Seriously, and like so now that makes more sense because I kind of had a vague understanding what a bubble was, but explain it that way. You know, a bubble is just a perceived value that has no basis in something's actual inherent value.
A bubble is a growth of nominal value, so what it's being sold for right now, beyond what its real value actually is. Real value meaning its ability to produce actual sellable goods. Right?
I would like one. Thank you.
Economics is stupid. It's straight up just stupid. It doesn't make any sense.
Quite stupid. Yeah, that makes sense because like I see a lot of people online saying like, "Oh, Bitcoin's a bubble." And I see what they mean.
It doesn't actually have any value.
Yeah.
Its value is that it's pricey. Did you hear of the Beanie Baby bubble?
Yes. Yeah.
People are like, "Oh, these things are going to have really good resale value in the future."
Why? Yeah.
No, they don't.
They're stuffed animals.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like that's what fascinates me about antiques. Like antiques are just kind of like their own bubble. That's like
yes and no. Like collector's items are not a bubble because there's usually such low demand. But it's just like it's a low demand where people are willing to pay a high number for it because of the rarity of the object. So you can argue that the object actually has that value. A bubble is usually where there is no a bubble usually happens where it wouldn't be hard to supply something, right? Like theoretically, it wouldn't be hard to make Bitcoin. Like I think it is, right? Because you have to data mine or something.
So the way a Bitcoin is mined is you have you essentially test random combinations of numbers to find a valid key. Once you find one, like, this one's valid. I own it now. Because a way of thinking about it is, we actually talk about this in my computer science class, and I'm probably going to bungle this horribly, but I'm going to try my best. So, you can create a certain sort of character mapping or string mapping algorithm where you take a string or a sentence like hi, my name is Justin, okay, and then you can scramble that and encode it in such a way that it becomes just like a random sequence of numbers and stuff that's stored in a very small thing. The problem with that is that while you can know that the sentence you have maps to that, it's not the only thing that maps to that. Because the way it gets, condensed and compressed is it becomes a hex code that a lot of different things can map to. So it's not a one-to-one sort of function. You have this sentence that, yes, it validly goes to that. And the way you make sure that you're, like, the way that you make sure that, it hasn't been tampered with is, well, does this sentence I have go to this hex code? Even if a lot of other things can go to that hex code, most of those things are going to be gibberish, so you don't
basically,
care.
you just have to check every single hex code.
Yeah.
And then you do that, and that requires a lot of processing power because you're just doing every single hex code that exists or something like that, right?
Yeah, because you're trying to find which ones map to a valid Bitcoin value in the blockchain. Once you find one, it's nice.
Yeah, that sounds like bullshit.
Yeah, well, because we call it a blockchain because one way you can encode something is you can be like, okay, so say I have like a bunch of bank statements, and I want to make sure each one is legitimate and that they haven't been tampered with. Well, what I can do is I can set it up so that each bank statement is encoded with like with the name on that bank statement and the date, plus the name and date on the previous bank statement. That way, each hex code, that generates based off of the previous one. That way you have a nice sequence, you have a chain, and if any element of that chain is modified, you can easily look back and see, aha, someone tampered with the numbers here. Let's audit them.
I kind of get what you're saying. It's just developing code that is easily identifiable to have been modified with, so that you would have essentially what is a digital currency because you know if it's been messed with.
Yes, because if you found a legitimate Bitcoin, they'll know you found a legitimate Bitcoin because anytime you find one, it gets put onto the blockchain as a bank statement would, and I like
it. Definitely sounds like a scam.
Oh, it totally is.
It just is. It sounds like it's crazy.
Yeah, because like the only way to have a currency is to make sure it's like, okay, it's got to be it's got to be non-fungible. It has to be something that's unique in some way. It's identifiable. It's real.
That the only things that are real and identifiable are the things that actually matter. As like no, I mean that the things that like affect our lives in some ways. And money affects our lives, but only because it buys things that affect our lives, right? And what's weird is in a digital age, that definition kind of becomes more cloudy. But I think it still is like I buy a video game, but I don't buy. I'm paying for the work that people put into the video game, not necessarily like the actual physical product itself. But I don't want to buy a piece of code just because it's non-fungible.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it seems silly. Yeah.
I think most people though, because even with your explanation, I still probably don't have
I definitely don't. So.
But I think most people who are big into Bitcoin probably don't even have that understanding.
Yeah, they're just like, all I know is that if I run this program, it'll test out random numbers, and if it gets one that's valid, I'm good.
That's I make money.
Well, that's how they know there's a limited supply, because there are only so many combinations that can map to the hex code that identifies a Bitcoin as a Bitcoin. Because I think how it works is like, you test out like lots of different strings, just random strings, and if after they're encoded, they the encoded string starts with like 15 zeros or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, there you go. That's a Bitcoin right there. That's a unique token that identifies a Bitcoin. And the reason you can't just get as many Bitcoins as you want is because you don't know what something will be encoded to, because it's not a one-to-one relationship. There's no algorithm to figure out, yes, this thing will map to this. And so finding a Bitcoin by mining it is literally just testing random strings until you happen to find one. And that's why mining takes longer and longer and more computing power as time goes on, because once they're found, it's like, well, now finding another one just randomly by mining is just going to take longer. And that's why people keep buying GPUs to do that, because they need more processing power to test out random strings to find one.
But they had that crash recently where they stopped doing it, and then all those Bitcoin cards got back in the market. I'm not sure because you probably have had your computer for a while, but like PC enthusiasts were like, oh, look at all these graphics cards, they're cheaper again.
Yeah.
But it's because you'd buy one and it'd be burnt out on the inside because they've been used for Bitcoin mining. And we do got to end this off soon though.
Yeah.
I've been left tired by my economics rant.
Economics rant. Oh my gosh. Are we gonna end with some dorky joke? It has been 2 weeks. We've had 2 weeks to come up with something. Did you get the script I sent you?
Do you think
that you could build off of, so we could
two
do
things?
An improv
One,
sketch?
I can't read, and two, I'm not funny.
One, you can read it. Two, you are funny.
Listen, I don't know who you're talking to, but white guys can't be funny. I'm sorry.
I would say it's more of like
an
apricot or a pink.
An apricot.
I mean,
takes out the spray tan bottle out of the backpack. It's sorry, one second.
No, I got something.
Roll up the sleeves.
I got something worse. Wait, do I? Man, we're about to get canceled. You're welcome.
What do you got in your backpack? What the? That's terrible. That's terrible. Oh no.
Well,
no.
This was the Loudest Crow, although I feel like the crow is about to be silenced, so it's been great knowing you. Make sure
we're like Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau, your share name was...
Make sure you go out and buy NFTs. I will make sure they become valuable someday.
Yeah, we're talking about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
We go into that. That's the worst combo. And we're talking about reciprocation of love. We're incel... NFT loving, blockchain talking.
And now introducing the Loudest Crow subreddit.
Oh my! Could you imagine, man? Oh, even better yet, this is the Loudest Crow 4chan site.
Loudest Crow 4chan. There you go.
4chan
Even
page.
better. No, we're gonna make a new one called 5chan.
It actually exists, I think. I don't know. I think it does though.
17,362 chan. There you go. I doubt that
Wow, I
exists.
wonder why it's called. Anyway, yeah. Have a good day, guys.
Have a great day.
No, have a good day.
Have a good day. Oh, that's true. Because if your day is too good, then you're just going to be sad the next day.
No, I just don't want them to have a great day.
You just don't want them to have a great day?
Elijah's watching.
Oh.
Suck it. I don't want them to have a good day.
You know what? Don't have a day. You don't need to. You could die in an instant, so. No, that's the wrong thing!